They tell us the 19th century built these tunnels to connect a world of steam and iron. But the timeline is a paradox. They didn't build, they excavated. They didn't pioneer, they repurposed. Why would they construct the most complex infrastructure of an era before the industrial economy existed to justify it? It is a rupture in causality, a deep cognitive dissonance we were taught to ignore. Haven't you always felt it? That quiet hum of a story that simply doesn't add up? If you feel this resonance, this fracture in the official narrative, leave your mark. Tell us where in the world and what time it is, as you awaken. The official record is a text, but the crime scene is a landscape. To understand the depth of the lie, we must now become forensic observers. We must look at the physical evidence left behind, not with the eyes of a tourist, but with the cold, discerning gaze of an investigator. Let us examine the portals. They are not mere entrances. They are grand cyclopean gateways carved from the mountain's heart with a precision that defies the 19th century. Look at the scale. The sheer, overwhelming audacity of these structures. The stone is cut with geometric perfection. The ornamentation speaks not of national pride, but of an imperial, timeless aesthetic. From America to Russia, from Britain to the heart of Europe, the same engineering DNA manifests at the same historical moment. This is not a coincidence. It is a signature. It is the undeniable evidence of a single, unified global infrastructure, a planetary transport grid built by one civilization, with one standard of technology. A civilization that thought not in terms of nations, but in terms of continents. What we have been taught to see as the heroic, nationalistic engineering triumphs of emerging industrial powers are, in fact, the final, desperate acts of a fragmented world. They are the uncoordinated efforts of amnesic inheritors, each claiming a different section of a pre-existing, interconnected system. After the Great Cataclysm, after the reset, the survivors, or rather, the new elite, the parasites, found the arteries of the old world choked with mud and debris. The great works of the 19th century were not acts of creation. They were a global, synchronized project of excavation and reclamation. They were clearing the grid. But why? If the previous civilization was gone, and the new world was one of steam, steel, and burgeoning industry, why was this subterranean network so critical? The answer is as simple as it is horrifying. The grid was not reopened for the transport of coal, or iron, or textiles. These are not the works of engineers with dynamite and steam. They are monuments built to last millennia, resonating with a forgotten power. The deep, imposing shadows they cast seem to swallow the light, whispering of a purpose far beyond a simple railway. Now look at the official photographs of their supposed construction. Look at the men, diminutive figures in felt hats, covered in soot and grime, holding crude pickaxes and flimsy shovels. They stand before these monolithic portals like ants, claiming to have engineered a pyramid. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The scale of the work utterly humiliates the scale of the alleged builders and their primitive tools. The image is an insult to our intelligence. It is a carefully staged photograph designed not to document a process, but to imprint a falsehood. Look closely at this photograph. Do you feel it too? This profound sense of impossibility? If you see what we see, if your intuition screams that something here is fundamentally wrong, signal your agreement. Mark this video with a like, so the algorithm knows that more eyes need to be opened to this visual confession. But the scale is only the first layer of the deception. The evidence of usurpation is carved into the rock itself. In the oldest images, the tunnel entrances do not look built simulates the mountain. The scale is wrong. The priority is wrong. You do not move mountains in bankrupt nations to ship commodities that could travel by sea. No, these tunnels were cleared for a far more precious cargo. They were cleared to transport the new human capital. This was the primary logistical network for the great repopulation. In the wake of the reset, the world was left with ghost cities, magnificent, empty metropolises waiting to be filled. The tunnels were the discreet, weatherproof, high-capacity corridors needed to move populations on a massive scale. This is the hidden truth behind the orphan trains of America and the similar, less documented movements in Europe and Russia. We are shown quaint photographs of children on a platform, a heartwarming tale of charity. This is a cover narrative. The reality was a human supply chain, a military-grade operation to distribute centrally sourced or found populations, the orphans of the previous world, or perhaps products of the new incubators, into the empty architectural husks of the old one. They weren't building a railway for goods. They were reactivating a circulatory system for people, rebooting civilization itself under the silent, watchful eye of a new control matrix. They were seeding the new world with a population that had no memory of the old one. They appear to have been excavated out from it. We see signs of immense geological stress, of water and mud lines, dozens of meters up the rock face, consistent with a continental liquefaction event, the Great Mud Flood. The tunnels were not drilled through virgin rock. They were unblocked, cleared of the cataclysmic debris that had sealed them for an unknown age. The story is not one of creation, but of reclamation. And the final, damning proof is in the details of the masonry. Zoom in. Observe the original stonework. Perfect, seamless joints, without a trace of mortar, stones so precisely fitted they appear to have been fused together by a lost technology. And right beside it we see the repairs. The clumsy, crude patch jobs of the 19th century. Rough bricks, slathered with crumbling mortar, a desperate attempt to mend a structure they could not hope to replicate. It is an architectural scar, a confession set in stone. The superior, inherited technology being crudely maintained by an inferior one. We are not looking at a construction site. We are looking at an archaeological dig disguised as an engineering marvel. The stones do not lie. They bear witness to a story far older and far grander than the one we were told. They show us not the birth of an industrial age, but the clumsy autopsy of a forgotten one. A population that could be taught a new history. Our history. This is the true function of the global grid. It wasn't built to connect our nascent nations. It was built to serve a unified world that no longer exists. And its reactivation in the 19th century was not a symbol of our progress. It was the mechanism for our engineered forgetting. We live inside this repurposed system, traveling through arteries whose true purpose we can no longer comprehend, living in cities we are told our primitive ancestors built. We are the descendants of the cargo, unaware of the journey we once took. The resonance of this architecture is all around you. This is not a story confined to forgotten archives or distant mountain ranges. Look around your own city. Look at the old post office, the central library, the courthouse, the grand, pre-modern buildings with their impossible foundations, their colossal stonework, their doors and windows built to a scale that dwarfs the human form. Have you ever felt that cognitive dissonance? That deep, unsettling feeling that a building simply does not belong to the story you were told about its creation? These structures are the nodes of the old grid, hiding in plain sight. They are everywhere. You have seen them. Tell us where. The official account of the Great Alpine Tunnels is not a record of engineering. It is a carefully constructed piece of folklore, a bedtime story told to a civilization suffering from amnesia to keep it from waking up. It is designed for passive acceptance, and it wilts under the first ray of critical light. We are told to look at the Free-Douce Tunnel, connecting France and Italy, and feel a sense of pride in our recent ancestors' ingenuity. They present us with a timeline. Construction began in 1857 and was completed in 1871. A simple, clean set of dates. But history is never simple, and clean dates often hide a dirty secret. Let us perform the autopsy on this timeline. During this exact period, the Italian peninsula was not a stable, unified nation flush with capital for monumental infrastructure projects. It was a battlefield, a chaotic vortex of revolution, war, and political assassination. The wars of Italian unification were raging. The very ground upon which they were supposedly building this utopia of connection was soaked in blood and gunpowder. Are we to believe that while kingdoms rose and fell, while armies marched and economies collapsed, a multinational team of men in felt hats were quietly, diligently, and with unprecedented speed punching a 12.8-kilometer hole through the hardest rock in Europe? Let us map the echo of our stolen world, together. And so, the great repopulation was complete. The cities, once silent, were filled with the noise of a new humanity. We, the descendants of this transported stock, were placed into a world that was not our own. We awoke in a house built by giants, and like children discovering the master switches in a vacant mansion, we began to play with the machinery of a forgotten age. This is the story of our inheritance. It is a story of profound and tragic misunderstanding. We have come to call this phenomenon the mimicry of the survivor. It is the anthropological key to our modern condition. Consider the cargo cults observed in the South Pacific after the Second World War. Islanders who witnessed great metal birds descend from the sky, bearing unimaginable riches, could not comprehend the industrial and logistical chains that produced them. When the birds left, the islanders attempted to summon them back. They built effigies of airplanes from straw and wood. They carved headphones from coconuts and sat in makeshift control towers, mimicking the rituals of the air traffic controllers they had observed. They performed the ceremony, divorced from its function. They turned technology into liturgy. This is not a quaint anthropological footnote. This is a mirror. The logistics are not just challenging. They are a theatrical absurdity. The narrative then offers us its hero, its deus ex machina, dynamite. Alfred Nobel's miraculous invention, they say, is what made the impossible possible. It is a convenient plot device, but one that crumbles when you check the script's own footnotes. Nobel only patented his stabilized form of nitroglycerin in 1867. For the first 10 years of this supposed Herculean effort, a full decade of work, their primary tool for blasting through granite did not even exist. And for the final 4 years, it was an experimental, notoriously unstable compound, as likely to kill its handlers as it was to break rock. So the official story asks us to believe that they bored through the majority of the mountain with black powder, pickaxes, and sheer will, at a rate that would be respectable even with modern machinery. It's a narrative that demands we suspend not only our disbelief, but our understanding of physics, economics, and human history. It's a fairy tale. And every fairy tale needs its heroic inventor, its wizard. For the Alpine tunnels, that figure is Germain Sommeil. The history books paint him as a visionary, the man who single-handedly invented the pneumatic rock drill, a machine that supposedly increased the speed of excavation tenfold. We are that cargo cult. We live inside their airplane, yet we use its fuselage as a longhouse. The architects of the previous age left behind a world integrated with a subtle, powerful technology, a technology that was likely atmospheric, resonant, and clean. We, the survivors of the reset, found ourselves amidst its silent, dormant vestiges. We did not understand its principles. We could not replicate its function. We could only imitate its form and repurpose its shell with our own primitive means. Look at the evidence. We see the great cathedrals, with their intricate spires and rose windows, and we are told they are houses of worship. But their geometry speaks of harmonic resonance. Their spires, tipped with metal, reach for the sky, not in supplication, but like antennae. We have turned ancient power plants into temples, and we perform the liturgy of prayer inside, having forgotten the science of energy that was once practiced there. We see the obelisks, monolithic and precise, and call them monuments. We have forgotten their original purpose as nodes in a global energy grid. We see these star forts, and we are told they are for cannon defense, a laughable notion when their geometric perfection points to a mastery of vibrational physics, designed to harmonize and protect the land itself. He is the centerpiece of the entire cover narrative. But when we look closer, we see not an inventor, but a manager of a great rediscovery. The story of Sommeil is not one of creation, but of imitation, a story of a cargo cult in action. We propose that Sommeil and his team did not invent the pneumatic drill from nothing. They found something. Deep within the mountain, as they cleared the debris of a previous age, they likely encountered fragments of the original boring technology. Not a clumsy brute force hammer powered by compressed air, but something far more elegant. A piece of antiquitech. Perhaps a sonic drill that used resonant frequencies to disintegrate rock, or a vibrational tool that phased through the geological matrix. A technology so advanced it left behind a tunnel with smooth, almost polished walls, which later had to be crudely lined with the brick and mortar of the 19th century. Unable to comprehend or replicate its power source, they did what any resourceful but technologically inferior society would do. They mimicked its function using the most powerful means at their disposal, compressed air. Sommeil's invention was not a leap forward into a new technological age. It was a desperate, clumsy, an inefficient attempt to reverse engineer a relic from a lost one. We have turned the technology of our ancestors into a religion of stone and glass, worshipping the machine we no longer know how to operate. Now bring this understanding back to the tunnels. The original structure, the one they cleared of mud and debris, was likely a perfectly smooth, sealed tube. Perhaps it was illuminated by the very rock it passed through, using resonant frequencies. Perhaps it was designed for silent, frictionless vehicles that levitated on an electromagnetic cushion, crossing the continent in a matter of hours. The survivors who found it, our recent forefathers, could not even conceive of such a thing. Their most advanced form of transport was the steam engine, a brutal, noisy, inefficient machine that burned fossil fuels and belched toxic smoke. And so they performed the ultimate act of cargo cult engineering. They took this pristine piece of advanced, inherited technology, and they laid crude iron tracks inside of it. They introduced a filthy, clanking, piston-pumping locomotive into a silent, frictionless artery. It is the technological equivalent of finding a crashed starship, gutting its anti-gravity drive, and installing a coal-fired furnace to use it as a glorified tractor to plow a field. It is a desecration born of profound ignorance. The dissonance is staggering. The very act they celebrated as their greatest triumph, the railway through the Alps, was, in truth, the signature of their amnesia. It was the equivalent of finding a laser cutter and, unable to make it work, using its chassis to build a better axe. He wasn't an inventor, he was a decipherer of inherited technology, and his crude caricature of a drill was just enough to finish the job of clearing out the mud and rock from a pre-existing artery. The official narrative is fragile because it is a composite of impossible timelines and mythical heroes. It is a story that requires a constant, low-level state of cognitive dissonance to believe. It asks us to accept that in an age of war and chaos, with primitive tools and non-existent explosives, our ancestors achieved feats of engineering that would be a profound challenge even today. It asks us to believe that one man, at the exact moment of need, conjured a revolutionary technology from thin air. The story is an insult to the very concept of logic. And so we must ask ourselves, and we must ask you, does this children's story of heroic men with pickaxes and a conveniently timed genius truly satisfy your reason? Or do you, like us, feel the cold draft of a missing truth blowing through the gaping holes in their script? Do you feel the resonance of a far grander and far older reality? It was the moment they proved they had no memory of the world that came before. This brings us to the final, most revealing ritual, the grand inauguration ceremonies. Study the old photographs and engravings, the solemn processions of kings, emperors, and politicians, the religious blessings, the champagne, the carefully orchestrated pageantry. The official narrative presents these as celebrations of a new human achievement. But the forensic eye sees something else entirely. It sees a deep-seated anxiety. It sees a ritual of possession. These were not celebrations of creation. They were acts of magical appropriation. The new ruling elite, the parasites who managed the reset, knew on some level that they were merely tenants. They knew they had not built these wonders. And so, they created these elaborate public spectacles to perform a kind of mass hypnosis, a grand spell to legitimize their claim. Each ribbon cut was an incantation. Each speech was a rewriting of history in real time. Each photograph was a seal placed upon a stolen inheritance. They were consecrating a found object, declaring it their own creation to a population that had no memory to contradict them. The inauguration was not the triumphant final chapter of a construction project. It was the first chapter in the engineering of our forgetting. The fragility of their story is not a weakness. It is an invitation. An invitation to look past the stage play and see the colossal, ancient architecture they have tried so desperately to hide behind it. We now leave the realm of heroic fables and enter the cold, sterile laboratory of the audit. Here, narrative falls silent, and only the numbers are permitted to speak. And they speak of an impossibility so profound, it borders on the absurd. The official history of these tunnels is not merely a story with plot holes. It is a mathematical fiction, a violation of the fundamental laws of physics, economics, and system engineering. It is an equation that does not compute. Let us place the Gotthard Tunnel on the forensic slab, 15 kilometers long. The official records, sparse as they are, claim the removal of approximately 5 million tons of rock, Let us pause and internalize that number. 5 million tons. This is not an abstract figure. It is a physical reality that must be accounted for. The technology of the day was the mule, the wagonette on crude iron tracks, and human muscle. A standard wagonette might hold, optimistically, 1 ton of blasted rock. That means 5 million wagonette loads had to be hauled out from the ever-deepening heart of the mountain. It was a ceremony to solidify a lie in the public mind, a lie that has held for over a century. The lie that we are creators, when we are merely mimics, living in the echo of a far greater song. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, of a cargo cult living in the ruins of a technological palace, resonates with you, if you have ever felt that something is profoundly out of place in the story we have been told, then check to ensure you are subscribed. We need awakened minds here. The process of remembering is a lonely one, and we must do it together. But the grand ceremonies, the royal inaugurations, they were more than just theater. They were a necessary spell, a mass hypnosis performed on the traumatized survivors of a world that had been deliberately broken. Because to understand why they needed to claim ownership so loudly, we must first understand the silence that preceded them. We must confront the event that cleared the board, the event that filled these perfect subterranean arteries not with rock, but with a deluge of mud and liquefied earth. It was not a construction project. It was a planetary-scale crime scene cleanup. The cataclysm has many names, whispered in the dark corners of forbidden history. Now, let us apply the unforgiving logic of logistics. Consider the project at its midpoint, with the tunnel face 7.5 kilometers from the entrance. A single mule-drawn wagonette would need to travel 7.5 kilometers in, be loaded by hand in near total darkness, and travel 7.5 kilometers back out. A 15-kilometer round trip. How long does a mule train take to travel 15 kilometers on uneven track in a suffocating, smoke-filled environment? Let's be generous. 4, perhaps 5 hours per cycle. This means a single wagonette could, at best, complete 4 or 5 trips in a 24-hour period. To meet the timeline, this would require a constant, unbroken chain of hundreds, if not thousands, of wagonettes and mules operating simultaneously inside a narrow tube, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 10 straight years. This presents a logistical paradox of the highest order. The tunnel itself is the bottleneck. You cannot simply add more mules. They would create a traffic jam of organic and mechanical chaos, stretching for kilometers. Where was the passing track? Where were the staging areas deep inside the mountain to manage this flow? The official record is silent. The engravings show a handful of men with carts, not a military-grade logistical operation that would dwarf the supply lines of the Napoleonic Wars. The Great Reset. The mud flood. But the name is irrelevant. What matters is the physics of the event. Imagine the ground beneath your feet losing its integrity, the very bedrock resonating with a hostile frequency until it surrenders its solidity. A frequency weapon, perhaps. Or a recurring, cosmic cycle of purification. The cause is a mystery locked away, but the effect was absolute. A planetary scale wave, not of water but of the world itself, rising up to swallow the works of the old empire. It was an event that buried cities under dozens of feet of earth, toppling spires and filling these magnificent tunnels from end to end with a dense, suffocating slurry. It was the Great Reset button, a forced amnesia. And in the aftermath, as the mud hardened and the silence fell, the parasites emerged. The new elite, the inheritors. Their first and most critical task was not to rebuild, it was to erase. This is the true meaning of the 19th century's industrial miracle. It was the most sophisticated, most comprehensive engineering of oblivion ever conceived. Those men with pickaxes and steam shovels weren't pioneers of progress. They were janitors of history, scrubbing away the memory of their predecessors. Every tunnel they dug was, in truth, a tunnel they unclogged. They are showing us a photograph of a single rivet and calling it a battleship. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. We are asked to believe in a miracle of logistics that has no precedent and no physical explanation. And the debris is only the first impossibility. Let us speak of the air. As the tunnel burrowed deeper, the temperature of the rock rose to over 30 degrees Celsius. The air was a toxic cocktail of oil smoke from the lamps, poisonous fumes from the black powder and early dynamite, silica dust from the rock, and the exhalations of hundreds of laboring men and animals. Without a colossal, continuous supply of fresh air, the tunnel would have become an unlivable tomb within hours. The official explanation mentions crude water-powered ventilators and compressed air from the drills. This is a child's explanation for an adult's problem. Calculate the volume of that 15-kilometer tube. We are talking about pumping millions of cubic meters of fresh air, against friction and pressure, into a 7.5-kilometer dead-end shaft, and simultaneously extracting the poisoned atmosphere. The energy required for such a feat is monumental. The 19th century technology they present to us, primitive fans and bellows, is the equivalent of trying to ventilate a skyscraper with a handheld fan. Every kilometer of rock they blasted was, in fact, the hardened plug of a cataclysm they were paid to hide. They weren't building a new world. They were strategically renovating a ruined one and destroying the blueprints as they went. This was a war fought not on battlefields, but in libraries and universities. A great archive burning. Every book that spoke of the old world's atmospheric energy. Every map that showed its global infrastructure. Every scientific journal that detailed its true technological prowess became a candidate for forgery or flame. They gave us new heroes, fabricated from whole cloth, geniuses who invented primitive, inefficient copies of the very technology they were digging out of the mud. They gave us new timelines, new histories, new national identities, all built upon the bedrock of a single monumental lie, that we began as primitives, and that they, the new masters, were guiding us into an enlightened future. And what of those who remembered? What of the grandparents who told stories of a world without smoke, of silent vehicles and light that bloomed from the air itself? They were recategorized. Their memories were diagnosed as madness. The new network of asylums, built with an unnerving synchronicity across the globe, were not hospitals for the unwell. They were prisons for memory. It defies the laws of fluid dynamics. The men inside should have suffocated. The fact that they did not points to an anomaly, a pre-existing system, or a complete fabrication of the construction method. This wasn't a construction site. It was a sealed environment that required life support technology far beyond their admitted capabilities. Now, we zoom out from the tunnel itself and examine the industrial ecosystem that should have surrounded it. This is where we encounter the most profound evidence of all, the great silence, the vacuum, the complete absence of the necessary industrial backstage. To bore through 15 kilometers of granite requires thousands upon thousands of hardened steel drill bits. These are not simple iron tools. They require advanced metallurgy, consistent tempering, and mass production. Where were the foundries? Where are the purchase orders, the metallurgical analyses, the blueprints for these high-wear components? The narrative shows us the stage, but the factory that built the set is missing from history. And what of the machines themselves? The famed pneumatic drills of Sommeillet were complex pieces of equipment. They required thousands of precision-machined parts, hoses, and compressors. Who manufactured them? A single workshop. For a project of this scale, you would need an entire industrial district, a precursor to Detroit, churning out spare parts day and night. Any tongue that remembered the truth was silenced, either by the asylum's sterile needle or the quiet finality of a back-alley blade. They engineered a generational amnesia, ensuring we were all born as orphans into a history that began only yesterday. We are the children of the great forgetting. Silence is their most powerful weapon. The cognitive dissonance they built into our world is their fortress wall. But it is a wall with cracks. Sharing this information is not a passive act. It is our defense. It is how we drill a hole in the dam of forgetting. Send this to someone who needs to wake up, because every voice that joins the chorus weakens the spell of the great silence. And so we travel through these arteries of stone, encased in our high-speed carriages, believing ourselves to be the pinnacle of progress. We look out the window at the blur of rock and marvel at the achievements of our recent ancestors, the men with felt hats and pickaxes who supposedly gifted us this convenience. This is the grandest illusion, the most profound and crippling cognitive dissonance they engineered. We are a species with a planetary amnesia, living as tenants in a house we did not build, whose foundational blueprints we can no longer read. The historical record provides us with heroic portraits of inventors, but it hides the utter lack of the industrial base required to realize their inventions. It's like finding a modern microchip in a Roman villa and being told the villa owner invented it in his personal forge. This pattern of negative evidence is the core of the forensic case. The absence of detailed geological surveys. The absence of complex structural calculations for the tunnel linings. The absence of a logistical plan for feeding and housing the thousands of workers, an army encamped in the high Alps for a decade. Every single question an engineer or a project manager would ask today is met with a deafening silence from the pages of history. They give us poetry and patriotism, but they cannot give us a single credible bill of materials. The arithmetic is unforgiving. It is not an opinion. It is a calculation. 5 million tons, 15 kilometers, 10 years, with mules and black powder and primitive ventilation. The equation simply does not resolve. The only variable that allows for a solution is the one they forbid us to consider: that the primary task was not construction, but clearance. That the tunnel was a pre-existing artery of a forgotten world, choked with the debris of a great cataclysm. We are cosmic orphans, celebrating our ability to change a light bulb in a palace, while the master generator that once powered the entire estate lies dormant and flooded in a forgotten basement. The official narrative tells us this is our home, built by our own hands, brick by painful brick. But the scale of the architecture whispers a different story. It hums with a frequency of loss. We are not owners. We are squatters in the ruins of a fallen kingdom, and we have mistaken the ruins for the peak of civilization. This investigation was never truly about stone and steel. It has always been about the reclamation of a species, dignity. To accept the official story of these tunnels is to accept a profound diminishment of our own potential. It is to accept that our ancestors were primitive, struggling creatures who, by some miracle of brute force and sheer luck, created wonders that defy the very logic of their own supposed industrial capacity. We are told to see this as a story of triumph, but it is a narrative of control, designed to sever us from our true inheritance. Each cyclopean portal, carved into a mountain flank with impossible precision, is not a monument to 19th century grit. It is a doorway, a portal to our own stolen timeline. Clearing hardened mud and silt is a different problem from blasting solid granite. It still requires immense labor, but it changes the entire logistical and technological equation. It explains why the builders could follow a perfect trajectory through a mountain range. They weren't navigating. They were following a map left by their superiors. Mathematics does not lie. It is the purest language we have. If you can reconcile these figures within the known laws of physics and logistics, if you can engineer a plausible solution where history has provided none, I would genuinely welcome your theory in the archives below. But until then, the numbers themselves stand as silent, unmovable witnesses. They testify not to a story of 19th century progress, but to an industrial-scale cover-up. They are the ghostly fingerprints of an inherited technology, the echoes of a truth buried deeper than any tunnel. The logistical paradox of the Gotthard Tunnel is not an isolated problem. It is not a Swiss anomaly or an Italian riddle. Here, in the cold, hard numbers of its impossibility, we find not a conclusion, but a doorway, a portal. Because the moment you accept that this one tunnel could not have been built as described, the entire historical landscape begins to shimmer and distort. The anomaly ceases to be a local curiosity and becomes a global echo. To acknowledge the impossibility of their construction is not an act of skepticism. It is an act of profound memory. It is the first, painful tremor of a mind waking from a long, induced slumber. The lie is etched in stone, but the truth is whispered in the voids, the missing blueprints, the absent logistics, the silence where a universe of industrial support should be. They want us to believe we are the clumsy heirs, struggling to read the user manual. But the truth is, we are the descendants of the architects themselves. The resonance of that forgotten greatness is buried deep within our own code, waiting for the right frequency to be reawakened. To question the foundation of their story is to begin rebuilding our own. It is to declare that we will no longer be defined by the engineered amnesia of a parasitic elite. We are the children of a lost golden age, and the evidence of our inheritance is all around us, waiting to be recognized not as a relic, but as a promise. The forensic investigation does not end here. It deepens. If you feel the resonance of this truth, if you are compelled to continue digging with us, beyond the veil of the official narrative, then subscribe and activate the signal. A planetary resonance. We must now zoom out, pulling our focus away from the alpine rock until the mountains themselves become mere wrinkles on the globe. Let us travel, not by steam train, but at the speed of thought across the Atlantic. We arrive in Massachusetts in the years between 1851 and 1875. Here, they are boring through the base of the Hoosac Mountain Range. They call the project the Bloody Pit, and for good reason. The official story mirrors the Alpine fairy tale with chilling precision. Men with black powder, hand drills, and later notoriously unstable nitroglycerin are said to have clawed their way through nearly 5 miles of solid gneiss and schist. The timeline is, once again, a work of fiction. The budget overruns were catastrophic, the death toll was biblical. And the result? A perfectly bored tunnel, an artery of impossible scale, whose stone portals possess the same signature of cyclopean masonry we left behind in Europe, the same dissonance, the same over-engineered grandeur that seems to mock the supposed creators. The pattern is identical, the signature is the same. They are digging, not building. They are clearing, not creating. Let the vertigo take hold. We leap back across the ocean, to London. The year is 1863. While the pioneers in the Alps in America are supposedly inventing tunnel boring from scratch, the Metropolitan Railway opens in London. Welcome to the Resistance, the world's first subway. But look at the images, look at the scale. These are not mere tunnels. They are subterranean cathedrals of brick and iron, vast vaulted chambers and perfectly arched corridors, built using a technique called cut and cover. They tell us that thousands of men, with shovels and wheelbarrows, dug immense trenches through the heart of the world's busiest city, laid the brickwork, and then covered it all back up. The logistics of this operation, the displacement of earth, the rerouting of existing sewers and gas lines, the sheer tonnage of bricks required, it beggars belief. The ventilation systems alone, designed to clear the toxic smoke of steam locomotives from miles of underground track, represent an engineering feat that seems to emerge from a vacuum, fully formed. There is no slow, painful evolution of the technology. It simply appears, synchronously, and the echo continues. Budapest, 1896. The first electrified underground line on the European continent. Again, the same story. A sudden, miraculous appearance of advanced civil engineering. We travel east, to the frozen wastes of Siberia, along the path of the Trans-Siberian Railway, built at the same time. We are shown photographs of men with pickaxes standing proudly before tunnel portals that defy their own existence, bored through permafrost and mountain ranges with a geometric perfection that their tools could never achieve.